So we have now got to the point where Paul is teaching Timothy to the order of worship, the order of the church. Not the building, obviously. It's the Christians that make up the body of the church, that make up the church, which we are a part of that body. So now in chapter 3, he's going to give us qualifications of bishops, elders, and deacons. And then the latter part of the chapter, he's going to teach us how to conduct ourselves in the church. How should we conduct ourselves in a daily life? How do we look as Christians? So, again, I think it's important that we read the chapter. So we'll just read it, and then we'll dive right in. Chapter 3, verse 1. This is a faithful saying: if a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetousness. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into the reproach and the snare of the devil. Likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, holding the mystery of the faith with a pure conscience. But let these also first be tested, then them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Likewise, their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their houses well. For those who have served as deacons obtain themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. These things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. But if I am delayed, I write so that you may know you ought to conduct yourselves in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the ground of the truth. And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up in glory. So, again, chapter 3 is a great instruction chapter, if you will. And if you don't mind, let's start at the end of the chapter and let's work back toward the front. There's really 3 sections: bishops, deacons, and how are we going to act in Christians. So let's start in verse 14 and think about how we're going to act. And the reason I'd like to do that, I want to get there. I want to make sure we talk about it and not make it to that point, okay? So we'll discuss these verses and then we'll work our way backwards, if that's okay. So beginning in chapter 3, verse 14, is teaching us how to live as a Christian. This is a summary of what Paul did in this letter. This is the foundation of the whole epistle to Timothy. He's teaching Timothy how to live. He's teaching Timothy how to act as a Christian. He's teaching Timothy to be there for the Gentiles. So what's the application for us? The same, isn't it? It's the same application as Paul was teaching Timothy, he's telling us. So how do we do that? If you think about several words we could put in here, right? What's your example? What does that mean? What is your example? The way of life. People are watching us in all things, right? It doesn't matter if we know it or not. We should be the same. how do we grow in the church? How do we grow today? Sorry, Brian. Fellowship? Yeah, absolutely. We grow in fellowship. How else do we grow? We study. 2 Timothy 2:15. Be diligent, right? King James says, to study to show thyself approved, rightly dividing the word. What's the application there? Be ready, right? In season, out of season, to give an answer. That's exactly how we grow. Paul was teaching that to Timothy in a area in his life that he was probably young, age-wise, but I don't know that he was young in the faith, because he was pretty sound at this point. I think he was solid enough that Paul had enough confidence in him to say, you need to stay and you need to preach and you need to work the Gentiles. Same question could be asked about us, right? Yes, sir. That's right. Claude said that he had God as his leader. How could he be wrong? So look at verse 14. These things I write to you, though I hope to come to you shortly. Paul is saying, I'm going to write these things down. I'm going to teach them to you, but I want to come. I want to be with you. But if I am delayed, I write to you so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God. I'm writing these down so you'll know. How do you know something? Can any of you ladies or any of you gentlemen that cook make cornbread? A lot of yeses. We can make cornbread. How do you make cornbread? You learn it. You write it down. You read some recipe, right? You have an instruction. I'm sorry, sir. He said, just watch your mother. That's a pretty good example. That's right. How many of us can balance our checkbooks? Yeah, a lot of hands again, right? That's a thing of the past. Our 18-year-olds to 22-year-old generation, Audrey, do you know how to balance a checkbook? Yeah, that's what I thought. They don't know how to do that. Yeah, that's true. They don't know how to count money back to you either. Sometimes I do it for fun. If my bill is $10.56, I give them $20.56 and see what happens. Anyway, there's some knowledge there, right? So if we are getting knowledge from Paul by inspiration to know something, what's the word ought mean? How many times have you used that in a sentence in our everyday life? You ought to do that. We should do it, right? Yes, sir. Sir? Oh, it says, yes, right, a suggestion. So, if you know something and we ought to do it, what is that? Miss Betty referenced Wayne Jackson made a comment that said, if you say you ought to do it and you don't do it, it's basically a sin. And I agree with that. That's exactly what it is. Well, you know, I ought to put butter in my pan or some kind of grease and put it in the oven to make the cornbread. But I probably won't do that because who has time to let your skillet warm up, right? What's going to happen to your cornbread if you don't ought to put the grease in there and get it hot? It's not going to be good, is it? So if we know something and we ought to do it, what's your conduct? What is conduct? I've said it before. Our grandmothers used to say, mind your manners, Clyde. What's mind your manners mean? You better behave. You ought to do what you're supposed to be doing, right? You ought to listen to your elders. You ought to respect. You ought to, we can fill in the blank, right? I'm sorry? Yes. Watch your faith. That's what he said. Watch your faith. I agree with that. So we got know, we got ought, and we got conduct. Very, very important in 2 verses. Is our conduct different in the church than in the world? It should not be, Dennis said, probably, but it ought not to be. It should be the same, right? Why do we think Paul spent this time giving Timothy these instructions? You think it was to Timothy personally? I think it was to him personally, but I also think it was to the congregation. I think it was to the Gentile nation. Yes, sir. Correct. Absolutely. He said that basically when you think about Paul being inspired, he was inspired, but Timothy was not. So the instructions to Timothy was from God through Paul, and it was a challenge because he was in a Gentile nation that was not looking to God, and it was an encouragement also. Very good comment. We've got to keep that in mind, that everything that we're learning here is from God. And that's how that we change. That's how we should change. If it's in the truth, we should get out of the way and let it happen, right? Yes, sir, Dennis. Yes, sir. So Dennis said that if we think about it as preparation, we ought to have that desire to change, to prepare. And he referenced the elders here. We try to get everybody to do things that we can't see, to prepare for that. Let me ask you a question. If I say I have decided to do something, what happens? What is that? You start your preparation, or you do it, right? Let me submit to you that a decision is not an action. I decided this morning that I'm going to dunk a basketball again. Y'all are looking at me like, yeah, he's got 3 heads and crazy. I probably cannot do that. There's some physical limitations. But I decided this morning that I'm going to do that. I've decided that I'm going to play golf to a subpar round every time I go. I've decided to do all these things. A decision, friends, is nothing. The action is where the important is, right? And that decision statement's not original for me. But it makes a lot of sense. We ought to do something is the action. Yes, sir. He said, don't say one thing and do something else. Hypocritical. Don't do it, right? So the knowledge of the ought to in the conduct. If we stop and think about that, that hits us in the heart, doesn't it? That's our command to do better. Is it a command? I don't think it's a trick question. Is it a command? I think it is when you have the truth and you're trying to do better. It is the ought to do is we should do it. To conduct yourselves in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the ground of the truth. And without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. What's the mystery? Been revealed already, right? It's the will of God through Christ. That's what Paul was preaching. That's what Timothy was preaching. That's what all the other apostles were saying. The mystery is Jesus. The mystery is the Word of God. It is the way to live. It is the conduct that you ought to conduct yourselves in the house of the Lord. Where's the house of God? John, is the house of God at York Institute? He said, I believe some of it's there. You know what he means by that? I think he's probably trying to live in the church in his circular world. Does that make sense? I agree with that. Yes, sir. Jerusalem. Yeah. Brian said Jerusalem, wherever we are. Is the church at the grocery store? Is the church at Yes, sir. Say it again. It's wherever we are. That's what he said. It's a trick question. Where's the church? It's wherever we decide to go. It's wherever that we take the action and we get in the car and we go to Walmart and we buy the milk and we buy the bread or whatever. I'm not endorsing Walmart. I don't like that. Yes, sir, Mr. Curley. Yes, sir. He said, wherever that we are and we act like Christ, that's the church. That's where the church is. That's exactly the context of these verses in 14, 15, 16. Now the mystery is, yes, sir. Mm-hmm. John said that we're saying the same thing Peter said. We are the living stones. Thank you. The living stones of Christ. So if you think about it, our lives and our teachings, our conduct should point directly to Jesus Christ in everything, in all that we do. Is that hard? I would say yes. I don't know that it would be very easy or really worth anything if it was just easy. Because we have to make decisions based on our thoughts, based on the truth, and based on what is going to be pleasing to God. Yes, sir, Brian. Oh, sure. Yeah, he said everybody sins. And please, I agree with that. But we are in a state that we try not to sin, and we don't continually to sin. We don't make it a habit to choose to do that. We mess up, obviously. So, let's look at verse 16. God was manifested in the flesh, justified in the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles, believed on in the world, received up in glory. What is that teaching? Could be one word or two words. What's it teaching? Jesus Christ, is it not? His life. That's it. His life. Jesus Christ, life for salvation. Yes, sir. Yes. That's right. Yes, sir. Doug said that last phrase was a summary of what Jesus' life was. It's all pointing to Jesus, but it gives us the instructions how to do it. That's when the mystery was revealed. Was when they went to the Gentiles and said, Jesus Christ died for you. And the Jews had all heard it, but they didn't, I don't think they believed it very strongly, because they were wanting to not let anybody in except them. So if you think about Jesus being the truth, in John 14:6 teaches that John taught that he was the truth. Jesus Christ, the truth. The mystery's been revealed. So we think about that mystery, and we think about the summary of 14 to 16. If we think about it being our lives are directly pointing to Jesus, that's how our conduct ought to be, right? So, again, I think this chapter is in 3 sections. That was the 3rd section. Any comments, any questions at all on that? Yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry. Sure. 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 And thank you for clearing that up. Leanne said basically the decision is important, because without the decision, without the knowledge, nothing's going to happen. If she decides today to wake up and follow Jesus, and she starts attending worship services regularly, she starts hearing, she repents, she confesses, and she's baptized, and then she's living faithful, that decision was very important. And maybe I didn't say it very clearly. The decisions are important, but without the actions behind the decisions, they're not going to happen, right? That's what she's saying. Thank you. That's a good point. Because I can decide all day long that I'm going to be a better basketball player tomorrow, but if I don't get up out of bed and I don't start some conditioning and I don't put my elbow under the basketball, I'm not going to make the shot. Same applies to the word. Yes, sir, John. Sure. Sure. So John said, referenced chapter 2 of James, where it says, you believed, you've done well. But the demons also believed and trembled. There's more to the belief. And to Leanne's point, the decision is, the knowledge is to believe, but there's more to it. And I agree with that. And let me say again, I didn't make it very clear when I said decisions are not very important. They are important, but they're nothing without the action. If you follow through, that's right. And Leanne referenced, she could decide this morning that she's going to eat better, and then she didn't. What happens? Nothing. The decision was made, but nothing followed through. Yes, sir, Dan. Sure. To summarize, it's not what you say, it's what you do that defines you. Yes, sir, Mr. Curley. Exactly. Whatever that we do, whether good or bad, we are influencing someone. Amen, she said. She agreed. So we are always in a state of being influential, right? So Paul is teaching through inspiration, let your actions define you. And it goes back to that 14, 15 section. Knowledge, ought, conduct. You've got to have knowledge how to behave, right? We got to know what's expected of us, which we do. So how can we be better? I think it's living through Jesus in our everyday walks. Yes, sir. Sure. That's right. Claude reinforced the idea of being in the worship service. Yes, we're supposed to act like Christians. We're supposed to pay attention. We're supposed to offer our worship to God. But more importantly, outside of the 3 hours that we're at this building a week, 4 hours, we need to be living the Christian life all the time. Because our influence could be zero, and he actually said it could be negative. It could be below zero if we're not living the Christian life outside of these four walls. And that's exactly right. Yes, sir. Can you give me an example? Sure. Good. His example was what we're talking about. Several years ago, they were on a softball team. Several members of this congregation came down to the tournament time. They were playing in a championship series, championship game, and it was worship time. And they all agreed that they were going to come to worship and did. That's a bold statement, but it's very, very powerful. Their influence said, yeah, you don't win the tournament, but what we've got going on is more important. Will you come with us? Right? Any other? Yes, sir. No. Yes, you are correct. Doug said that in verse 15 where it talks about you ought to do the conduct in the house of the Lord. It's not talking about here because we are part of that church and we're doing it out. Do what you ought to outside of here. Is that good? And I agree. I think that's exactly what he's trying to teach us. Have you heard the term Sunday Christian? What is Sunday Christian? Christians only on Sunday. We dress up, we come, and we're done in 2 hours, and we go and we cheat in business or we cheat in whatever, and our speech is not. Was it Peter or Paul that his speech portrayed him? Peter, when he denied Christ. You know, our speech, is it different on Monday mornings? Is it different on Wednesday at 6 o'clock in Bible class? Timothy is being taught by inspiration through Paul that it should be the same. Is that a hard lesson to learn? I think if we're honest with ourselves, it probably is. That's why we have to try to grow every day to do better. Any other comments? Any other questions? Yes, sir, Donald. That's right. Donald referenced in 1 Corinthians talking about the individual of the church. You know, our bodies being as the temple of God. If you destroy me, you've destroyed the temple. It is collectively. The church is collectively outside of these walls, but it's also individual. Donald said that we have that responsibility as me, one, to do what God had said. And their influence could be the only church that someone could see, the grocery store, at school, at whatever. We could be the only sermon, if you will, that they ever heard. Not with our words, but with our actions. We're driving our cars on Lantana and we're driving the speed limit and somebody cuts us off. What do? What? Yeah. What should we do? Is that what he's talking about? You know, it bothers me if I'm in the left-hand lane coming across Lantana, coming across Miller, and somebody zips by me in the right lane to get ahead of me. What are they going to do with that half a second? But it irritates me. But what do? Heather sometimes says, why does it bother you? I don't know why it does. Because it was my turn and somebody jumped the line, I guess. It's a little bit of a funny example, but I'm trying to say, when somebody cuts us off on the road, we tap our brakes and we smile and say, thank you, God, for him not letting your providence not being run over just now. And let them go on, right? Yes, sir, Brian. Yeah, yeah. It's like a slingshot. They come up that right side. Anyway, that's examples of how we should do it, right? Yes, sir, Mr. Curley. Yes, sir. He referenced that it probably bothers me because they're not being courteous. And they're not obeying the law. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? When we think about living for Christ, it's easy to say that, hey, let's grab our Bibles and let's study and let's do what Christ wants us to do. But I keep saying I don't mean to. The teaching is from God through Paul to Timothy to us is that we should not cut off people. We should be polite in the grocery store. We should understand that we individually are the church as we are collectively. And if we get in our mind about having a good attitude, we're going to grow, aren't we? It is by necessity. If we change our attitude to do what Christ says, we're going to be better and stronger. Any other comments on this section? And again, to summarize it, I think in everything that we do, every action that we take, every thought that we have should be Christ-centered. And if we're trying to do that, the mystery, the love, all of it is going to come exactly what God wants it to be. Yes, sir, Clyde. Actual people come into worship service. Claude said he'll soon be 89 years old, and a lot of things have changed. In the last 50 years, to summarize what he said, now church attendance, worship service, people coming is at the lowest it's ever been. That's sad to me. But it's an action based on a decision. Well, I don't have to go anymore. I can feel God on the bass boat, or I can feel God at the grocery store. It's all about feeling, right? In the world. So absolutely. Absolutely. Gene said that people pay attention more to our actions than they do our words. That's great. I'll give you one last example on this. When I was refereeing ball, I always thought that it wasn't what a coach told me, it's how they said to me. If I'm across the floor and I'm under the goal and the visiting team's up on the other side and they're 84 feet away from me and they go, "You are the best referee in the world," somebody's shooting free throws on the other end because the people up there can't hear him. All he's saying is, so that's a technical foul. He's over by him and he goes, "Brian, I believe you missed that. That was probably the worst call I've ever seen in my life. Thank you, sir. I'll do better next time." And run to the other end. See the difference? I think that's to Gene's point. His actions speak louder than words. So we got about 2 minutes. Let's talk about bishops and deacons. And if I could, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Well, we're the flock. Yes, the church is absolutely the flock. So to summarize, we've had really good studies, we've had really good thoughts, and we've worked hard to think about elders and deacons. And to summarize, it's basically these two sections in the first 13 verses is a moral character. How is your compass based on these attributes? Most of them are talking to Christians. There's a few specifically to the elders and to the deacons. A man and one wife, all right? Male, specifically to these two. Why was it important for Paul, through inspiration, to teach Timothy to say, you need to go and you need to take and establish and you need to tell these men what an elder is, how to conduct, what a deacon is, how to conduct? Why did he do that? Yes, Doug? That's exactly right. Doug said it goes back to teaching Timothy a continuation of the church. You do these things, the church is going to continue. And that's a great summary. Perfect timing, too, because we're out of time. Thank you for your comments and your great attention. Next week, good Lord willing, we'll try to do chapter 4. Chapter 4 it'll hit us right between the eyes if we pay attention to it.